Good afternoon. Today is Friday, the 27th of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, delighted to be joined by Debi Evans and Mark Anderson from the States. Now, the backdrop looks sunny, blue sky, but I can assure our viewers it's getting a little bit chilly here. It's clearly autumn is settling on Plymouth and the southern part of England at least. We're going to get into the news, and the initial bit of focus is really of the madness in the world. That's clearly evident in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine. But let's have a little bit of a commentary on Ukraine, which will lead us into the fact that our so-called leaders, national leaders, global leaders, seem to be leading us only into one place, and that's a dystopian future. But reports from the battlefield, I've just taken one because this is a critical report. It's about the imminent the imminent falling of the Ukrainian fortress at Ugledar. And what is so significant about this city, if I just try and arrow it here, is that it has a very large number of very strongly built high-rise buildings which have dominated the view over very, very flat terrain. This is in the Zaporozhye sector, a little bit further to the east of the front line. So you have high-rise buildings which have been strongly fortified and defended by the Ukrainians. This has dominated this part of the front, but the Russians have now finally moved into the outer edge of this city, and it's assessed that it will fall very soon. And the really sad and terrible thing is that Zelensky pulled out his high-level troops, his experienced troops from the defense of Ugledar, replaced them with a lot of conscripts and told those conscripts they could not withdraw, they could not retreat until he had finished his dialogue in America, because obviously the fall of this stronghold would damage his reputation while he was involved in talks in America. So very, very callous, huge numbers, huge losses. Let's just have a little look at a little bit of video on screen. We'll just play it on screen. And these are some of the massive explosions as the Russians have been hammering these high-rise buildings in Ugledar. This is probably their air-launched FAB weapons, very, very big gliding bombs. But if we look at what's happening in other areas, this could be anywhere across the front. I believe it's up in the Kursk sector, but we can see the sheer horrors of what happens when the Ukrainians are in forest areas or the hedgerow areas at the edge of the big fields. So we can be sure that it doesn't matter how well trained the troops are, they are going to die under this sort of bombardment. And of course, the Russians absolutely plentiful in ammunition, contrary to every single lie that the BBC and Western media has put out, that they're running out of ammunition. Now, let's have a little look at a clip with Tony Blair. This is the Milken Institute. Thank you to Debi for pointing this one out to me. But this is getting to the sheer horrors of our so-called world leaders and how they approach life. Let's look at Tony Blair in action.
I mean, we're not off the record here, but okay, but I'll say that anyway.
You're talking to a journalist.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I mean, what am I thinking of?
What are we doing? I don't know. Yeah. Wake up.
But I actually remember having a conversation with Putin about Ukraine when I was still in office, and saying, look, we've got no strategic interest in pulling Ukraine towards us. So just to reassure you, if Ukraine wants to go with you guys, that's fine. And his view was very, very clear. I mean, I'll never forget the conversation. He said, no, they're coming with us. I said, yeah, obviously if they choose to come with you, that's fine. And no, not if they choose. And I'm afraid that's where the problem is. It shows that.
I find this clip particularly offensive because the idea that Tony Blair didn't know about the plans for the proxy war in Ukraine or what was actually taking place prior to the start of the violence in Ukraine. I find this unbelievable. This is the man, the lies of weapons of mass destruction, and yet supposedly we are to take his side on how Putin is and how he acts. Let's have a look at US Secretary of State Blinken, see what he has to say.
Months, and particularly getting through the winter. We have once again, not just the prospect, but the reality of Putin weaponizing winter, weaponizing the weather, to use energy as a weapon in his efforts to subjugate Ukraine. And we know that the upcoming winter will be challenging.
So what is it? The face of false concern there. But of course, in every major war that the Americans have been involved in, whether it's been in Iraq or it's been in other areas, they've always taken out infrastructure in exactly the same way that the Russians are doing. But now, of course, it's the Russians, and that's bad. If the US was doing it, or indeed if Israel was doing it in the present day, that is perfectly acceptable. So sheer hypocrisy by these individuals. Now let's have a little look at Trump on stage. And he was clearly not happy with what had taken place with Zelensky on US soil, and indeed the whole relationship with Kamala Harris.
Biden and Harris caused this situation by the stupidity of what they said, by every move they make. But they caused the situation, and now they're locked in. They're locked in. I watched this poor guy yesterday at the United Nations. He didn't know what he was saying. They just don't know what to do. They're locked into a situation. It's sad. They just don't know what to do. Because Ukraine is gone. It's not Ukraine anymore. You can never replace those cities and towns, and you can never replace the dead people, so many dead people. Any deal, even the worst deal, would have been better than what we have right now. If they made a bad deal, it would have been much better. They would have given up a little bit, and everybody would be living, and every building would be built, and every tower would be aging for another 2,000 years. And it will only get worse with these people. With Kamala she doesn't know what she's doing.
Well, he's correct in one sense. I think that they're locked in. They don't know what they're doing. The war has to go on because they're locked on, the war in Ukraine, that is. But on the other hand, Trump seems perfectly happy to allow an equally violent and unpleasant war to go on in the Middle East, where he's not actually making the same observations about the US and indeed Israel being locked into the same conflict. So I don't know what it is, whether it's a blind eye or it's sheer hypocrisy, but this is the state of the world leaders that we are supposed to follow. Let's contrast them with some mature discussion. And I've got a little clip here from the interview that I facilitated on Sunday with Scott Ritter and Major General G.D. Bakshi from the Indian Army, retired. Now, we're just going to play a little clip of that just to give a feel for what was said between these two individuals at the very end of the interview.
So India is in a very unique position today. Yeah. Indian Prime Minister Modi was just in the United States meeting with the president. I know he was there as part of the Quad forum, but the point is, America trusts India. They want good relations with India. Modi was in Moscow embracing Vladimir Putin. We have a leader of a nation that is welcomed in both capitals, capitals that today aren't talking to one another. It's absolutely imperative, I believe, that India take advantage of this to try and recreate the role that Sweden played in the 1980s to facilitate dialogue between the United States and Russia on strategic arms control. And this, General, if there's anything you could do to advise your government to assume this role of facilitator of dialogue.
Scott, I'd like to thank you for that, but I do think that is the way we are going. The very raison d'etre of the Prime Minister Modi going to Moscow, having detailed interactions with Putin. Then he went to immediately 6 weeks after that to Kyiv. He had detailed interactions with Zelensky, and now he's coming to the United States. Is precisely, I think, the beginning of such a role, the Swedes, as you put it, redux, in terms of which we would be able to convey, if the two sides are not talking directly, we'd be able to, convey each other's views to the next party, and thereby try and develop off-ramps. Very specifically, I think after the November elections, these off-ramps would be needed, not just by the countries involved, but by the world. It is like we have in India a very profound statement, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, treat the world as a family. And I don't think we will go very wrong, because at the end of the day, I find the differences between us are far less substantial than what is common. And I can make that out in this trilogue today.
So I just say to our audience that interview, which is now up and available on the UK Column website, is 2 hours long. Encourage people to watch it, to listen to some very interesting, informative and mature discussion between these two gentlemen, in stark contrast to the sheer madness of our so-called chosen world leaders. Debi, let's bring you in, and I'm smiling because I think you're going to take us into open government, but I'm not quite so convinced that our government has been open at all in the fomenting of the wars that it's taken us into around the world, particularly in Ukraine and with the horrors out in the Middle East. What have you got for us?
Well, yeah, you're quite right. And good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's almost like we're watching a magic show here, and there's a lot of distraction going on. Magicians use distraction, right? Sleight of hand. And today I want to introduce you to what I believe is one of the biggest public-private philanthropic partnerships in the Western world that you probably haven't heard of. And bearing in mind that Keir Starmer has just said at the Labour Party conference, the state will take more control in people's lives, I think that this is going to be a segment where everybody in the Western world needs to be listening. So let me introduce you to the Open Government. And here's the UK National Action Plan 2023. This is to increase transparency, accountability, and these are the key words: public participation in government. So it goes on to talk about the UK Multi-Stakeholder Forum for Open Government, which is basically announcing their action plan for what they're going to do. So let's look at the action plan. So this is the next slide you'll see is the UK's 6th National Action Plan, 24 to 25. And you can see this is in collaboration with the Cabinet Office and the UK Open Government Civil Society Network through a multi-stakeholder forum. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what is the action plan? Well, Alex Burkhart, MP, started all of this off. And here's the action plan here. And they talk about the Procurement Act in this, open contracting, which is basically digitisation. And the Procurement Act actually has just gone through. They talk about civil society engagement, anti-corruption. They talk about the United Nations Convention of Anti-Corruption. I think every time we mention anti-corruption, perhaps maybe we should talk about this as being handled by what, in my opinion, is corrupt people in charge. So let's look at the UK Multi-Stakeholder Forum, because I believe this is the engine room. This oversees everything in the United Kingdom, and you can see that they've got 4 goals there, and they meet very often. And I'm literally only skirting the surface with this segment, trust me, there's so much to it. But the next meeting, if anybody's interested, is going to be on Wednesday the 23rd of October. And if anyone wants more information, I suggest we email Dr. Matt Donnelly and Dr. Ben Gittings, who are very kindly given their email addresses there, because I think we will have a lot of questions, because this is all going on behind closed doors. And it started off, actually, the Open Government Partnership started off in 2011. So this has been going on a long time, but I bet nobody I've spoken to has certainly heard about it. And who does it involve? Well, 75 countries are involved in this, with 150 local governments. So who are they? Well, this is where I say it's a public-private philanthropic partnership. We've got partners, government, civil society, businesses, non-profit organisations, and more. And they're overseen by a board of directors. So I'm not going to go into each one of them individually, because that's a whole new segment of its own. So let's just look at Maria Barron, who's the chair. And she is basically an Argentinian journalist. And she's been very much involved in civic innovator projects. She's received prizes. She's got lots of involvement on it. So she oversees the members. So the members then have to submit a 2-year action plan. So again, they're saying, we've got 75 countries, 105 governments, and now we're going to submit an action plan. But is your country a member? So here's a screenshot. You can search for your country, and I can tell you, if you are watching in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, South America, in the USA, yes, you are included. But no, India, China, Russia are not included. So what do they look at? Well, these are their policy areas. They cover everything, except, I think you're going to notice, they don't cover military. There's no mention of military in this at all. So we've got inclusion, anti-corruption and integrity, and then it goes on to digital governance, civic space, justice, open parliaments, environment, climate, health. And I've just highlighted one thing that I'm particularly concerned about, because the word protest seems to have disappeared, and protest has been replaced by freedom of assemblies. So these are going to be peaceful assemblies that are basically going to be policed by you, because this is all about you in government. So they've got a strategy, a 2023 to 2028 strategy, an open government partnership. And what does this mean? Well, it means we're going to get more trusted messengers. We're going to get more influencers. And on the next slide, you'll see that they're talking about an interconnected community. They're talking about making open government central, expanding civic spaces to cultivate champions and influencers. They're going to accelerate progress on reforms. They're going to launch partnerships. They're even going to become places where you can share your inspirational stories. And we have a number of countries to thank for experiments here. So I just want to show you a number of countries, because they've all made recommendations. And what kind of recommendations have they made? Well, thank you very much, Indonesia. But we are now going to be engaging people's access to justice and decriminalising assembly activities. Again, this is protests. So let's look at the next country. Who can we thank next? Well, we can thank Nigeria, because we're going to be looking at regulating the role of the police. This is basically about citizens police, right? Citizens policed. So when we go to Italy next, we can thank Italy, because they're going to give unobstructed access to internet platforms, and they've been working on a charter of internet rights. So all these experiments have been going on in all these different countries. And let's go to Ukraine, because Ukraine are included too. Considering they're a country of war, they've been experimenting with planned assemblies of peaceful events. And the USA, not to be outdone by, of course, they're looking at publishing data of law enforcement data in open data formats. Now, I've seen this happen in China, where people have their names, addresses, their phone numbers put up in public if they haven't complied to whatever. So all of these countries involved, who are the partners? Well, I'm not even going to go into them, but I'm just going to highlight a few. Civicus, Article 19, Carnegie, we've got Oxfam, and we've got Publish What You Pay and Community Democracies. Well, who are they? So I've just got one slide very quickly to show you, because again, this is a whole new news. No one else is talking about this. We've got Publish What You Pay, which is energy transition, net zero carbon, and the Community of Democracies, the Global Intergovernmental Coalition. And you've got Madeleine Albright named there. So this is all going on behind the scenes. And I've got, just to finish the segment off, a little bit of video to talk about open government.
Look at the wide-ranging, wicked problems we're facing right now. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the worst humanitarian refugee crisis since the Second World War.
Entonces sí es sumamente relevante tener la alianza de gobierno abierto para poder afrontar estas situaciones que se están dando en el mundo y que las democracias pues logren salir fortalecidas.
It is essential to the resilience of democracy for citizens to be engaged, for them to be invited.
The time to act is now. And the Open Government Partnership has a unique possibility because of the networks it has already put in place.
So this is your government. Act now. The networks are already in place. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Yes, well, you picked up that key thing. Many people think that what we're showing is just talk. It represents sort of hubbub and noise. No, this is policy being enacted, and it's being enacted really quickly. It's going to drag us into, I've used the word, a dystopian future. Mark, let's bring you in because, of course, as far as these organisations are concerned, everything in the future will be better. We will live in utopia. What have you got?
Well, last Friday, Brian, you might recall, was the first day of the Summit of the Future of the United Nations. And this summit actually was broken into two segments. The 20th and 21st is Action Days, which is largely youth-oriented. And then the next 2 days was the summit itself. Let's go back to that first slide, please. And this Summit of the Future Action Days began with this crucial information. First, by putting in place new international norms and mechanisms to both manage and harness the potential of emerging areas of innovation. Second, by doubling down on our efforts to achieve the world envisaged by the UN Charter, the Sustainable Development Goals, and our commitments to address climate change, with a particular focus on making sure we have the necessary resources and fit-for-purpose institutions to deliver. Finally, the goal and the objective of all this will challenge us to take a fresh look at the UN itself, its institutions, which includes the WHO, and ways of working to be more networked, inclusive, and effective by engaging all stakeholders. So I'm focusing today just on those first 2 days, the action days. This illustration to the left here was curious, and it shows that global cities, associated artwork has in its center local and regional government and the key role of cities and mayors. So the global cities movement is tying into this, something I'll be covering October 10th for an AV program, and I covered it a couple years ago as well. So global cities do plug into this. Over 7,000 people came to UN headquarters for the 2 days of action days. Again, a lot of youth involved to get them marinated in UN principles. and we'll move on from there. And I believe we have a video coming up, and it kind of gives an overview and a feel for what they're going after here.
I see world leaders, I see mayors and legislators, civil society, the private sector, academics, artists, activists, and young people. We will not solve today's global problems without contributions from all of society.
Speaking to the youth is like speaking to the future. You are the torchbearers.
The Summit of the Future is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reshape multilateral system and to put young people at the center.
Give them the space and the freedom to participate meaningfully in finding the solutions.
We need to decentralize and localize financing so that communities can step up and take action for themselves.
If you are not including persons with disabilities, you are missing 1.3 billion people around the world.
It's going to take transformative change, systemic change, underpinned by feminist principles to make sure that young people, especially young women and girls, are at the center of multilateralism.
Las mujeres con discapacidad seamos vistas.
The smart bet is always on the youth.
Not just youth consultations or youth-informed decisions, but young people at the table.
An agreement is nothing without action.
To recommit to multilateralism through the United Nations to resolve disputes peacefully.
Action must be taken now to safeguard the SDGs and sustainable futures for all.
None of this is possible without innovative, inclusive, and multi-stakeholder partnerships.
I believe that it is possible for us to have a win-win.
What I can promise you is that we will carry your insights and ideas forward into the Summit of the Future.
Friends, this is what effective, inclusive, networked multilateralism must look like.
Let's shape our future together.
As you can see, Brian, the whole thing is really heavy with the language of globalese, lots of terminology that can mean different things to different people. The use of the word multilateralism, I'll mention briefly, is rather curious. In geopolitics, that basically means like if you have unilateralism, the United States will work with another country directly. But multilateralism involves coalitions of countries working together or sometimes in conflict. And so in this context, it's not altogether clear what they mean by multilateralism, but that's just one term among many that is used in the language of globalese. Anyway, moving forward, more on the action days, it gets into bringing together representatives from member states, civil society, private sector, academia, local and regional authorities, youth, and many more. The action days provide an opportunity for broad engagement. These stakeholders have all played a key role in shaping the Pact for the Future, which is very important, and its 2 annexes, and will be critical to implementation. And we'll describe that a little more, what those annexes are as we go along. These are some of the elements out of the report that's posted and available about the action days. And I won't read all this content, of course, but there's lots of email addresses in here, and they put this out as public information. So UK column viewers are free to write to these people and ask questions, just as we may as reporters. A digital future for all was part of the first 2 days of the overall 4-day event. And so that's interesting, a digital future for all. And it's almost like they're pushing us into digitization in sort of an arbitrary fashion, as if we all absolutely need it. Another one, how can parliaments help close the Sustainable Development Goals financing gap? And it mentions in here, the Agenda 2030 cannot be achieved unless financing of sustainable development is massively scaled up. So that means taxpayers of individual nations must massively scale up the taxes to try and get this to happen. And we'll move on for some other planks of the action days. Another one was inclusive digital future for all. We might have had a duplication there on that one. At any rate, the one after that is fair, inclusive, and anti-racist economies to leave no one behind, which has sort of a left-wing bent to it in terms of the terminology there. And we'll keep going from there. We'll get into the Global Digital Compact, which is a very important part of this, Brian. It's a comprehensive framework for global governance of digital technology and AI. 20 years after the World Summit on the Information Society, which happened quite some time ago, of course, it charts a roadmap for global digital cooperation to harness the immense potential of digital technology and close digital divides. On September 22nd, the first day of the actual summit itself, after the 2 action days, the world leaders convened in New York for the Summit of the Future, the official summit, where they adopted a pact for the future that includes a global digital compact. The source of that, of course, is the UN itself. And this basically just lays out the very general structure. You have the Pact for the Future, and one of the 2 annexes is the Global Digital Compact, and the other is the Declaration on Future Generations. But what this boils down to, Brian, is that the UN is really involving the youth, as they did in the first 2 days of this overall 4-day soiree, and getting them marinated in UN principles to get them to carry the torch for a digitized future, for the Declaration on Future Generations. And it really boils down to maintaining and sustaining and implementing the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. If you had to boil it down to anything, that's what it's all about. Because without the SDGs, the UN loses a major part of its mission. That's central to the UN mission right now. So back to you, Brian.
Mark, thank you very much for that. And I'll just add to that, of course, these policies are off to one side. That's how we, the public, perceive them. But the reality is they're being enacted through national government. So if you want to know what Keir Starmer and his team are up to, they're not creating individual policies for the nation state of the United Kingdom. What they're doing is bringing in these policies that we've just been describing by stealth. It's a very, very devious system. And the only way we're going to fight it properly is by understanding what these policies are and where they come from. Debi, let's bring you back in because you've been looking a bit more into this particular future aspect.
I just wanted to say, the Summit of the Future is something that UK Column have been talking about for over 6 months. And I just want to highlight that we were talking about this on the 14th of February. So if anybody out there is saying that we haven't been talking about it, we certainly have. And we seem to be coming to an inflection point. This was the general wordage that was going on at the United Nations. But not only have UK Column been talking about this for over 6 months, I've also been writing about it in my blog. And this is why we say, please come to the column first, because we are ahead of the curve on so many things. But my observations on the Summit of the Future are basically that Africa is going to be a big deal. So we're going to give, it's like a Robin Hood. We're going to give all of our money to Africa. We're going to, as Mark said, accelerate the sustainable goals. This is basically a rehash of the United Nations. This is the United Nations saying, you know what? Model 1 is now gone. We are now going to launch the New World Order. This is what it's all about. The Pact for the Future is the New World Order, and peace and security was mentioned over 40 times in the Pact for the Future, and the word strengthen was mentioned over 100 times, I think. So that's where we're going. This is the launch of the New World Order. But let's look at a very short clip of the Secretary General in his opening remarks, because the future is not bright at all. It seems we're sitting on a powder keg. Have a listen.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our world is in a whirlwind. We are in an era of epic transformation, facing challenges unlike any we have ever seen. Challenges that demand global solutions. Yet, Geopolitical divisions keep deepening. The planet keeps heating. Wars rage with no clue how they will end. And nuclear posturing and new weapons cast a dark shadow. We are edging towards the unimaginable, a power keg that risks engulfing the world. Meanwhile, 2024 is the year that half of humanity goes to the polls, and half of humanity will be affected. I stand before you in this whirlwind, convinced of two overriding truths. First, the state of our world is unsustainable. We can't go on like this. And second, the challenges we face are solvable. But that requires us to make sure the mechanisms of international problem solving actually solve problems. The Summit of the Future was a first step, but we have a long way to go.
Long way to go. Well, the next place to go is the UN Climate Change Conference in Baku in Azerbaijan. This is going to be held between the 11th and 22nd of November. And for anybody that's interested, you can go now and get the Observer Handbook, which has been published online. And let's not forget what COP stands for. It's the Conference of Parties, a supreme decision-making body. So if we just return very quickly to the World Economic Forum, I just want to bring your attention to this report that was My Carbon, that was published in 2022, and an approach for inclusive and sustainable cities. But I want to draw your attention to a paragraph that has been going around on social media, because it actually says COVID-19 was the test of social responsibility. A huge number of unimaginable restrictions for public health were adopted by billions of citizens across the world. There were numerous examples globally of maintaining social distancing, wearing masks, mass vaccinations, and acceptance of contact tracing applications for public health, which demonstrated the core of individual social responsibility. So there you go. They're admitting that this was one big experiment, as we all said. And looking forward to Davos already. It's not long, 20th to the 24th of January for the WEF annual meeting. They're going to be discussing geopolitical shocks, stimulating growth to improve living standards, and of course, energy transition. And if you want to know more, you can go to Davos, to the website, and you can get more information there. Not long to wait.
Debi, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Debi. It's just pouring in, this agenda, and as you've quite rightly said, these are the pieces of the new world order, a global system of government coming together in front of our eyes, some of it hidden in plain sight, if you like, but the agenda is becoming very, very clear. So our Prime Minister, Starmer, the members of Parliament, they are all bringing in this agenda. They're simply not discussing it with the public here in UK, same in other countries worldwide. So it's up to us and other people, as many people who see these reports, to spread information about what's really happening. And I'll just say one of the reasons we have such comprehensive show notes on the UK Column website under each news programme is to allow people to see the evidence and the documents themselves, and then to share that with other people. Now, if you like what we do and you want to keep us running and growing, then please become a full supporter of UK Column. Make a donation. Yes, that helps, but really it's the memberships that are so important to us, because this gives us stability and the ability to plan ahead. So £5 a month, £50 a year, or for some people, they've been generous enough to say, I'd like to become a lifetime member. So you can do that via the website. Of course, you can buy from the shop. And if you're interested in health products, we work with Clive DeCarl, and you can buy his products through our site, and the UK Column benefits from that. So if you're not a full supporter of the UK Column, please go online and have a think about it, because it's tough enough providing media in competition with the legacy media, and we need your financial support to do this. Now, one of the things that we're constantly saying is that on the website you can also work to help us, particularly as a member. So just as an example, Mike took the wonderful day that Bob Moran came to visit us. And of course, you can share all of this on the social media platforms. And here it's illustrating there's already 65 comments, which you might like to see. We'd also like to say there are tickets left for the conference, but they are selling. So if you haven't yet decided to come and join us on the 19th, please do buy a ticket. It's going to be really wonderful to see you all. We've got some great speakers, and this is going to be the stepping stone to getting UK Column live, not only in Bristol and the south of the country, but in other parts of the country in 2025. So please come and join us and support us in that way. I'd also like to remind people that I will be speaking at the Heritage Party conference tomorrow, along with Charles Mallet. We're guest speakers. We are speaking because we're invited. I'll be talking on fighting the New World Order, and Charles Mallet will be talking about free speech. I'm sure it's going to be a lovely day, and we were honoured to be asked to come and speak to that audience. Now, Debi has mentioned a blog, but she's got a new blog up. If you go to the UK Column website, you can have a look at that. And this, of course, helps us. Now, where does that take us? I think we should be into a video here, actually. So as I prepared for the news today, before we get to that, we've got this one, which is a tweet which I put out with some help from Debi, where I made a comment about what was happening in the world. It's really been astonishing, but this thing has been shared thousands of times, so I just thought I'd play it back to our audience today to say that a few words can sometimes seemingly make a big difference. Let's have a look at what I said. To the audience is, if there's anybody out there that thinks that UK is still run by an elected government, they're sadly mistaken, because the government is simply the puppet of the world agenda, and it's those global policies which are doing the damage today. In my opinion, we're being attacked by our own government. Well, and I absolutely stand by that comment, and a big thank you to everybody who's taken the trouble to share that. Now, as I was preparing for today's news, it's funny how things unfold, but I started to get drawn into material around AI. Let's have a look at this first little video clip.
You want to protect yourself and your customers against fraudulent or risky activity, but without disrupting the overall payment experience. To do that, you need a holistic solution that profiles normal behavior and monitors it across all channels to spot complex fraud. That is why we created ARIC, Featurespace's real-time machine learning fraud management platform. Here's how it works. ARIC uses a variety of sources to ingest millions of data points, and using Featurespace's unique adaptive behavioral analytics, the platform spots and understands changes in behavior in real time. The platform understands the context of normal behavior, with streams of data for each customer transaction and interaction. Instead of looking for bad behavior, ARIC looks for anomalies in good behavior. It then recognizes the importance of subtle anomalies, indicating when they're acting out of character, all in real time. This allows ARIC to more precisely target fraudulent and risky activity, including new and known attacks based on what it's learned, which means fewer transactions are flagged or declined, and fewer alerts are sent to its intuitive dashboard for review, keeping fraud analysts focused on investigating only the real fraud. As it continually learns, the system is low maintenance and doesn't require constant updating. This means reduced fraud losses, improved operational efficiencies, and a frictionless customer experience. Featurespace. Outsmart risk.
So I'm just going to say that if you do something simple like try and buy a train ticket, it'll be software like this that's been analysing you and what you're doing in the world, immense detail, sucking in the data from many, many different sources in order to check you and to see whether you're straight or whether you're some sort of criminal attempting to defraud the train company. This is very, very dangerous stuff. It's pouring in. But let's see where the government is going. And a big thanks to Kenny for pointing this out to me this morning. He stumbled across this on the government.gov.uk website. Fair Now, AI governance platform and AI governance program implementation. But this was the real kicker. It says that the governance platform serves as a, quote, single source of truth for managing AI governance, risk and compliance. How outrageous is this that the government is saying it's a source of truth? If we go and have a look at the detail about what they're talking about, it says that organizations are leveraging AI and they need help from a platform to make sure that they're behaving themselves in respect of governance, risk and compliance. And this is an automated system to help them do this. But actually what the government is doing here is advertising, because this is not the government talking to you. This is them simply quoting from what the company itself has to say. And of course, if you do some simple research, you can find more about it. But here's the chief executive, Guru Sthupathy, and he's saying, well, the potential of AI technology is exciting. The number one factor holding back adoption is business and regulatory risk. And he goes on to say, our platform helps customers understand and mitigate their AI risk, ensuring compliance with rapidly evolving regulations in a centralized and simplified way. Now, that's probably fair enough, but can you claim this as a single source of truth? This is nonsense and very dangerous, and yet it's being put out by the government. Contrast truth in this direction with a member of the public trying to get truth out of Sheffield City Council by freedom of information on the key subject of child abuse. And essentially, once freedom of information request was sent in, you can freeze the screen to see this, or we'll help you out with the show notes. But just to make the point that when a member of the public was asking Sheffield City Council about very strange things that had happened which prevented the truth coming out about child sexual exploitation in Rotherham and Sheffield, what did Sheffield City Council do? Well, they obfuscated the freedom of information requests, and so between the 16th of April 2024 to the 26th of September this year, they have absolutely stalled the whole process of giving the public the information on that cover-up. So there we are, a little bit of a contrast between what's happening in the so-called AI field, truth, absolute truth, but if you ask for basic truth about the abuse of children, then the local authorities at least are lying and covering up. Debi, I think that brings you back to global citizenship, which is where they're trying to push us, where we haven't got to think at all because these systems will do it for us.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. And, you know, going back just very quickly to AI in Extra, stay tuned if you're a member for Extra, because I'll be shedding some light on AC. I bet you haven't heard of AC. You'll hear about it in Extra. So yeah, global citizens. Well, we've been talking about open government. We've been talking about sortition. We've been talking about you're going to be responsible for all the decisions. So what is a global citizen? Well, if we look at the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, it is very much an agenda. This is the United Nations talking about global citizenship, a new and vital force. But somebody else is involved in the Global Citizenship Scheme. Now, who could that be, I wonder? Well, the Global Citizenship Commission is chaired by none other than our very own Gordon Brown, who seems to have rewritten or partly rewritten some of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with a living document. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see this living document, and you'll see the picture's a bit small, I'm afraid. For those of you that are watching on a phone, you might not be able to see that. But Gordon Brown is right in the middle there with the United Nations. And he's talking about changing the world. How's he going to do it? Well, he's talking about environment, nuclear proliferation. He's talking about about education, global inequality, pretty much everything. He's an expert on everything. And I've just been reading his latest book, which is called 7 Ways to Change the World. And it's a very interesting book, and it seems as like he knows everything about everything. Gordon Brown has been very busy in the background, again, doing things that the mainstream media aren't telling you about. But what are you doing tomorrow? Well, if you're in New York and if you're in Central Park at 2:00, you too can go to the Global Citizenship Festival. Have a look at this. Tomorrow, Central Park. But what do? What is a global citizen? They're changing the movement, changing the world. They've got campaigns, they've got collaborations, they've got events, they've got broadcasts. It's all very exciting. But how do they themselves define a global citizen? Well, they define it as social influencers. So they're impact makers, they're action takers. This is all about tweeting or Xing. This is all about posting your stories, as we just said, in open government. And we've got great ambassadors too, celebrities like Chris Martin from Coldplay, who seems to head it up. And then we've got a few more screenshots, and I'll just mention a few of the names because I don't know all of them. Maybe I'm a bit too old to know some of them, but I do know a few of them. Hugh Jackman, John Legend and Usher, there. And then in the next slide, you'll see Adam Lambert, of course, who's the lead singer with Queen. And you've got Idris Elba et al. And not to be outdone, drum roll, please, because now we're going to introduce you to a member of the royal family who's also very involved in global citizens. So who else than the Duchess of York at Cisco Youth Leadership Award Global Citizen Prize. Enjoy.
You rock, you lot. You really rock. And past winners, fantastic, amazing. And Global Citizen, can I just say thank you so much for giving them this platform in order to be able to speak their voices. Thank you. Could you come on. Better. And I want to say, I'm the generational bridge because I'm still very young, in case you hadn't realized. Yeah, exactly. And I believe in no judgment, and I believe everyone has the right to be themselves. I'm redheaded, I'm completely strange, and I'm fine. Just to let you know that I'm never more proud of all of you today. Right? And on behalf of the entire world of us grown-ups, I'm not a grown-up, but on behalf of grown-ups, can I just say, I'm so deeply sorry we have ruined your planet. I know, but it's the truth, right? Okay, but however, good news is we're going to do something about it, and Global Citizen is doing it. We're all doing it. We take many steps, but we are doing it.
Are you doing it? Are you going to be a global citizen? Well, if you want to know more, we're a global assembly. So we've got a global assembly, climate and ecological emergency to influence COPs. Now, this is where this is all very interesting because it's to influence COP. So let's look at a statement that Antonio Guterres made here. The Global Citizens Assembly for COP26 is a practical way of showing how we can accelerate action through solidarity and people power. And it goes on to say they're talking about the People's Declaration for the Sustainable Future of Planet Earth. This is a global assembly, first of its kind. Members have been selected by a lottery. Doesn't that remind you of something that we talked about last week, sortition? This lottery will bring people together to represent interests of others, uniting and rallying citizens. Well, what citizens? Well, all I can show you, I'm afraid, is a Zoom shot, because this is what they show you on their website. And these are the citizens that you can thank for making all of these decisions for you. And I just want to highlight, just lastly, to finish this segment off, is that the Delphi method, because Brian and the column have been talking about the Delphi technique for many, many years. The Delphi method was developed by the Rand in 1950s. And this is where groups of experts or stakeholders use online tools such as Expert Lens, that's another news on its own, to anonymously answer questionnaires, receive feedback that represents the group's response, and then they all reach a consensus. And you'll be relieved to know that Delphi is alive and well in the UK government. And here's just a couple of examples. You can see that they're here in the Food Standards Agency, and they're using the Future Toolkit. Now, this Future Toolkit, I know, Brian, we're going to be doing much more work on this, because you can see it includes methods like Delphi, 7 questions, horizon scanning, 3 horizons, driver mapping. And this is all about the future thinking or the future thinking project. And this is also involved in the science department as well. So Delphi is alive and well in the UK government. And I just want to finish to say that the Clinton Foundation are involved as well. I haven't got slides for those, but I also noticed that Albert Bourla, Pfizer's CEO, he's involved in it. Everyone's involved in it, but did you know about it? I didn't.
Yeah, Debbie, this is the key thing. Everybody is involved in it, apart from the wider public, most of whom have no idea this is going on. Mark, in some areas, though, people are beginning to see that something's happening and they don't like it. And you've picked up on China and Mexico here.
Yes, I may have to give a slightly abbreviated version of this report. This is pretty astounding. It's not unknown, but it's been underreported. And the Coalition for a Prosperous America, the CPA, a pretty good think tank in Washington, D.C., has been sounding the alarm, especially throughout 2024. This first segment, or first slide, China's auto sector is moving to Mexico, 12 new manufacturing plants set up since 2019, and we'll keep moving on from there. Another report from CPA, Mexico is growing as new China hub. 2024 exports already breaking records, a couple of very vital reports. People can look up the Coalition for a Prosperous America for more on that. This is a news bulletin. I wrote about this. U.S. Senator Josh Hawley, the Coalition for a Prosperous America, among other sources, have been raising serious concerns about China setting up shop in Mexico to manufacture huge quantities of automobiles and heavy equipment in order to export the finished products into the U.S. market, thereby avoiding the tariffs set up under President Trump in 2018 against vehicles sent directly from China to the U.S. This was leaked a little bit at the recent Chicago Council on Global Affairs program that I covered for the column, so I continued it for today. Congress so far has not budged on this issue, however, with many members beholden to big business. However, Mr. Hawley, the Republican out of Missouri, the former Missouri Attorney General, is looking positively populist here, and he introduced the Protecting American Auto Workers from China Act, a proposed law back on February 28th of this year. That's the day that it was read twice and referred to the Committee on Finance in the Senate, but there's been zero Senate or House overall action ever since. Congress seems to be frozen on this. This is Mr. Hawley's press release. I won't read it. The link is there for those that want to read that and learn more about Mr. Hawley, one of the better senators, arguably, in the U.S., but you got to grade with a curve. And we'll keep going from there. This is Mr. Hawley to the left and Maine Democrat Jared Golden, to the right. There's a House version of that bill that Mr. Hawley mentioned. That House version is H.R. 8351, sponsored by Jared Golden out of Maine, and it was introduced May 10 and referred that day to the Ways and Means Committee. According to the Library of Congress, however, as of September 22nd, there wasn't a single, that is, there was not a single co-sponsor of that bill in either chamber for what's clearly a bipartisan bill worthy of serious consideration. Mr. Hawley was quoted in that press release. I quoted him from the press release as saying, if Joe Biden wants to support American auto workers, he should start by protecting them from the existential threat posed by China, as Mr. Hawley sees it. We must put American workers first, bring jobs back to American soil, and reject radical climate mandates that make China rich and America poor. And I'll mention, Brian, that it appears that electric vehicles are a major thing. And this may be, I can't say for sure, but this Chinese production on Mexican soil may be Joe Biden's way of making electric vehicles the wave of the future and making it seem inevitable. So therefore, we could actually make the transition to electric vehicles, which would be a major part of a segment of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. But anyway, Hawley's legislation comes in the wake of Joe Biden's sweeping mandates on the American auto industry to force a transition to electric vehicles, as Hawley sees it. Under these radical Green New Deal rules, as many as 2/3 of all autos sold in the U.S. would be electric vehicles by the 2030s. And Hawley's legislation would, if ever enacted, increase the base tariff on auto imports from China to 100%, for a total tariff of 125% on all autos imported directly from China, but also apply the higher tariffs to all imported vehicles manufactured by Chinese automakers, irrespective of where the autos are manufactured. So that's the sum and substance of what Mr. Hawley is up to. And what this is all about, Brian, as the Coalition for a Prosperous America is outlining here, is a concept called nearshoring. We've heard of outsourcing, we've heard of insourcing. Now, what we're learning about here with this issue is nearshoring. And I won't read this slide. People can look up the Coalition for a Prosperous America online. The only thing I'll mention here at the bottom of the slide is a Morgan Stanley quote. Nearshoring has the potential to boost the growth of Mexican manufacturing exports to the U.S. to an estimated $609 billion in the next 5 years. That's a June 2023 Morgan Stanley report entitled "Mexico is Poised to Ride the Nearshoring Wave." The only upside I can think of this, Brian, and this is highly speculative, is there might be higher paying jobs created in Mexico that might help Central America, and that might cut back on the illegal immigration coming into the U.S. There is a possibility of that as sort of an inadvertent silver lining. And this last slide here that we need to go into is more of what I wrote. The 4 bullet points are what matter the most. A dozen new auto parts makers have set up shop in Mexico since the Section 301 tariffs were imposed in 2018. Some of those auto parts makers were invited by Ford and Tesla. Since June of 2022, more than 20 Chinese auto parts makers and car makers have announced a combined $7.06 billion in investments in Mexico. In February 2023, Tesla announced a $5 billion assembly line in Nuevo Leon State, roughly a 4-hour drive from the Texas border. That factory will have the production capacity to build roughly 1 million Teslas, that's electronic vehicles, annually, many of them US bound. And Chinese automakers and parts companies have actually been operating from Mexico since joining the World Trade Organization way back in 2001. And 8 auto parts companies were already in Mexico prior to the US enactment of the 2018 Section 301 tariffs. And I believe the last slide is just a chart of the 12 or so companies already operating in Mexico that are directly connected to China. And viewers can freeze that and look at that in more detail. So under the circumstances, Brian, that's all I've got for now. But a very, very interesting and rather troubling in some ways development. And this was something we'll keep a very close eye on over extended periods of time. So there we go.
Mark, thank you very much for that. And of course, one of the things it demonstrates is the power of global companies such as Ford, Tesla coming into the picture, where their decisions can be forced through governments and without any direct engagement in any form of democracy with the public. So, yeah, it will be fascinating to see how that goes. Now, Debi, I'm just going to skip through a little bit here, and we'll bring you into your finally 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, apparently.
Well, you know what? I saw this. What I say always is go back to the UK Column website, because we have stood the test of time. I mean, honestly, some of the stuff on the website is extraordinary. And this article caught my eye by Malcolm Massey. He wrote this in June 2013, and 225 almost could be 2025, couldn't it? And when you look it's entitled 1984 in the 21st century, how appropriate. But when you look in the article, and the next slide will just give you a little tiny flavour of what the article's about. It's talking about the feminization of men. It's talking about children being bombarded with sexual content in schools. So everything that we are seeing now, Martin was talking about. So I was well impressed. But you know what? Finally, I want to introduce you to Gwen Waltz. This is Tim Waltz, the US VP nomination, his wife, who is a teacher, and she's into criminal justice too. And she was talking at one of their rallies. And if I was American, and I am half American, I'd be embarrassed if I was watching this. Watching her turn the page. Have a look at this.
But I kind of liked it when she did this. Turn the page. You like that? Okay, so I need you to be with me and practice with me. What are we going to do? We're going to turn the page. Oh, pretty good. Do it again. We're going to turn the page. And we're going to turn the page. All right, so I'm going to be watching you because when I see Wisconsin, and I'm watching nationally on TV because this is a pretty important place in Minnesota. Help you practice with this. You just show me this. Turn the page. Right? Turn the page. And you know what else that looks like? Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Donald Trump. We are turning the page. 52 days and we are turning the page. 52 days and it is bye-bye, Donald Trump.
Maybe it's time for us to say bye-bye, Brian. I don't know what to say after that.
It's definitely time to say bye-bye to our audience today. We'll just leave you to think about the news. Look at the UK Column website. Go to the show notes for the detail. Please share this information because this mad society is being built very quickly around us, and it's up to all of us to speak out and stop it as fast as possible. Debbie, thank you very much for joining me today. Mark, thank you also. We will be in UK Column Extra. If you're a member, you'll be able to join us there. We're going to talk through some of the content of the news in a bit more detail. But if you're not yet a member, we will see you on Monday at 1 o'clock. And I'll just say that Mike, unfortunately, is away for a few days due to some personal issues, but he will be back next week. We will end there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.